Yo, what's going on guys? It is Foxy98 here and welcome back to a brand new video and a series that I haven't actually done since I believe the F1 2020 Formula 1 season, or potentially 2019, one of the two seasons nonetheless, and it is the F1 debate. Now, basically I had a thought going on in my mind that at the moment I'm not producing any F1 content here on the channel, and I really want to, but unfortunately, the F1 2022 game is appalling, and I'm just not playing it. So, what else could I do? Well, it's quite simple. Talk about F1 in real life, considering it's an actual thing. So we're doing that here. I put out a poll on my community post, and if you wanted you guys to see that, and well, I guess the biggest answer was, you don't know how good it is until you try. So we're going to. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bahrain Grand Prix. Now, I know the Bahrain Grand Prix happened over 7 days ago, but that doesn't mean that we can still talk about it, opening up a debate in the comment section down below. And also, we've had 7 days now to reflect on the Bahrain Grand Prix, so we can talk a little bit more about it. But for the first time ever, actually, in probably any of my videos, it's minutely scripted. I know, to stop me going on a tangent like I normally do when I'm talking about specific topics for about 35 minutes, I actually have a set of notes that are listed right underneath the camera for me to look at and to make sure that I am talking about the things I need to talk about in the required time period to do so. So, yeah, let's get straight into it though, and let's talk about the Bahrain Grand Prix. So first things first, we're going to be talking about my personal opinion on the Bahrain Grand Prix. What did I think of it before I start to cover a couple of teams in a little bit more detail compared to others, and then make my predictions for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That's basically how I'm going to be doing this, so let's get straight into it. First things first, how good was the Bahrain Grand Prix? It wasn't too bad. The biggest problem with the Bahrain Grand Prix is the one team that was the best team on the grid, Red Bull, absolutely dominated and gave us no action at the front of the field. It really did just take a bit of the spark out of it, because overall there was a lot of good racing overall between a lot of drivers, and we'll be talking about Fernando Alonso in more detail, as he was the man that gave us that all-important action that we obviously so desperately need. Now, this is a very strange situation for Formula 1 to be in, because the race unfortunately fell flat because of Red Bull's performance. But at the end of the day, we kind of have to take it with two sides of the coin. At the end of the day, Formula 1 is obviously a sport, but it's also a business as well at the same time. And of course, if you're going to get more revenue and more investment in, you need to make the sport more exciting. The thing is, for the team side of things, of course, they want it to be more exciting. They also want it to be fun. But at the end of the day, the teams that are participating in Formula 1 are spending so much money. They need to get that money back. And how are they going to do that? Simple. Win. So for Red Bull, as much as it's annoying that Red Bull dominated 2022, albeit Ferrari threw the towel on that one, and they've obviously come to Bahrain and got a 1-2 finish quite convincingly, it does obviously put a sour taste in your mouth, but at the end of the day, all you've got to do is sit there and just credit Red Bull for doing the job. That is their job. They have to win. Every single team on that grid needs to win. And if they're not winning, they're not doing their job right. Red Bull are winning, they're doing their job right. And, you know, it is how it is. So, obviously, that fell flat. And obviously, we were expecting maybe something from Ferrari, because in qualifying, they actually were quite close. But in the race, especially with the tyre degradation, Red Bull had that completely covered. And were able to even do a double soft stint. Nobody else on the grid could even fathom doing soft, soft, hard. Everyone had to do soft, hard, hard. Unless you were Lando Norris, that did soft, medium, hard, intermediate, wet, C0, C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and pneumatic pressures for about 55 years. We'll talk about that in just a little bit of a while. But overall, qualifying was actually quite exciting. Q1 and Q2, we saw glimpses of Red Bull at the front. We saw Ferrari, usurping Red Bull in Q1 and I think a bit in Q2. So that sort of set a bit of excitement there. And we also saw Aston Martin doing quite well. And even Mercedes-Benz had a lot of promise going into qualifying with some really good lap times. And then Q3 just felt really, really flat, in my opinion. I'm not sure about you, but it definitely did for me. The problem with Q3 was not necessarily because Red Bull locked out the front row, but it was a case of Fernando Alonso and the Mercedes drivers didn't have any tyres left at the end. And obviously, they only were able to do one run, so they did one run. Now, the Red Bulls and the Ferraris did their first run, and you're thinking, right, okay, it's only about a tenth and a half in it. This could get quite interesting. Then all of a sudden, the two Red Bulls go out, and then Sainz goes out, and then Leclerc just doesn't bother going out. He decides to stay in the pits, and that's it. Qualifying's done. And it was just really fell flat, because it was just like, yeah, well, Sainz is not going to beat the two Red Bulls. He's just not quick enough. Only really Leclerc could do that. Verstappen gets pole. I mean, Perez, I looked at the comparison, actually lost it in the last corner. Otherwise, he was on for pole. His race pace was a different story, though. And I was just a bit like, oh, that kind of sucks. Because you just love seeing that first run. And then you get that hype for the second run when they're going to go even faster. Maybe make mistakes, but it's going to be even better. And it just didn't happen. For the race itself, obviously, Leclerc decided to save a set of soft tyres, and they came into effect, getting past Perez into turn 1, but Verstappen was gone at this point. Leclerc was then able to hold off Perez, and we nearly saw the Aston Martin drivers of Stroll and Alonso having a full-scale collision, which would have caused severe damage, but for some reason, Alonso's car was built out of pure rock, steel, or obsidian from Minecraft, because that thing was not breaking, no matter how many times he made contact. Super lucky, though, to do that. And, yeah, obviously they were able to get away scot-free. The majority of the battles actually came from Mercedes versus Aston Martin, which was actually really fun to watch. Obviously, we saw the two Mercedes drivers in front of Aston Martin, but it was clear that their tyre degradation was worse than that of Aston Martin. Of course, with the lack of downforce that Mercedes has, particularly on the rear end, they were unable to get on the power, so they were lacking in traction, and they were sliding through the high-speed corners, meaning that they were just getting those tyres hotter and hotter and hotter, and they had to manage more and more and more. And of course, for Alonso, it was a lovely duel between him and Russell seems to have a little trademark move going on, and I've started to spot it now, and we saw it back in the 2022 Grand Prix with Verstappen. When the two of them went side by side, Verstappen had the inside line, and you think that the job is done, but somehow Russell finds a way to just carry more speed around the outside into any corner and hold it there and keep it going. And he did that well with Alonso up towards turn 4. Alonso had the inside line and was just fractionally ahead going into turn 4, but then Russell, all of a sudden, is just swooping around the outside of turn 4 and keeping it side by side. Obviously, it wasn't enough. There goes the microphone. That's it, you know, all done and dusted now. And there you go, just like George Russell's race ready from that point onwards, because unfortunately then they suffered with the undercut and they lost out to Stroll. And then we saw some great fighting between Alonso and Hamilton, two world champions showing each other respect on circuit. At the end of the day, Alonso was in a much faster car, and there was nothing that Hamilton could do on that one. But it was great to see the two of them racing wheel to wheel. They had a great duel. I loved it. It was amazing. Alonso and Hamilton's double switchbacks. They both did. Hamilton switched back into turn 4. Initially, it looked like they made contact, but they didn't. So, you know, fair enough to the both of them. Then Alonso switched back into turn 10. No matter which way Hamilton would have gone, I don't think he would have been able to have fended off Alonso any more than he did. And of course, then Alonso going after Sainz after Leclerc's DNF. And then again, a lovely move down the inside from Fernando Alonso, finishing that off and getting an awesome podium. There was a lot of drama, though, further back. Obviously, we saw Ocon getting about 20 million penalties, and we saw Gasly with a fantastic fight back. Very much an under-the-radar performance from Gasly. And probably for me, apart from Verstappen, who led and dominated, was probably the best performing driver on the grid. Started last, got himself up to P9. Absolutely solid effort from him. You can't deny it. And that was kind of pretty much, apart from Leclerc's DNF as well, pretty much everything that happened in the Bahrain Grand Prix. So, on that front, as my camera has completely lost focus on itself, there we are, I'm back. We are going to go ahead and discuss each of the teams now one by one and talk about what I personally felt was good and what was bad in the teams. And there are some teams which I'm going to talk a little bit more about and some that I'm not necessarily going to talk too much about. Again, I don't like to ramble too much. So that was obviously my personal race rundown of what I thought the race was like. In terms of my overall rating for the Grand Prix itself, I'd probably give it maybe like a 6.5 out of 10. It lacked a lot at the front of the field, but at the end of the day, there was some great battling, like I just discussed, with Alonso, Hamilton. Sainz was also involved in that as well. Obviously, the shock drama of Leclerc DNFing, and there was obviously a lot of action further back. Even I forgot about Perez and Leclerc. They also had a good scrap, but that was kind of inevitable with Perez on softs and Leclerc on hards at that point. But yeah, the fact there was nothing at the front, of course, we had such a great duel between Leclerc and Verstappen in 2022, and even Hamilton and Verstappen actually in 2021. Both those two season openers were absolutely amazing. If we had it for a third season in a row, top job, but we didn't. So, what about all the teams though? How did they get on? Well, Red Bull had an absolutely faultless weekend. And as I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, these teams have come into the sport to win. They invest a hell of a lot of money to try to do so. And Red Bull dominated, and you just got to give them credit for it. It's as simple as that. They built a fantastic car. Now it's up to the other teams to showcase that they can go ahead and build great cars. In terms of Ferrari, this is one of the teams I wanted to talk a little bit more about. Ferrari are a team that threw it away. And it all actually started from qualifying. Basically, I have no idea why Ferrari decided to allow Leclerc to not do a second run and save a set of soft tyres. You know, Ferrari literally admitted that they couldn't beat Red Bull in qualifying. The fact of the matter was, though, after the first runs, I'm pretty sure it was less than a tenth and a half between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. And they had a set of soft tyres left, both of them fresh soft tyres. Ferrari literally admitted defeat and said that we're not quick enough to beat Red Bull in qualifying. We need a set of soft tyres for the race. But then they weren't even confident for the race that they were going to beat Red Bull. In that position, you've got a car that can fight for pole position. Get track position. You know, if you're going to sacrifice basically starting in third, that means that you need to have an almighty good start, not only to overtake the guy in second place, but to get the race lead as well. It's not just about overtaking Perez. You've got to get Verstappen too. If you can't get them both, then you've wasted your time because those fresh soft tyres are going to be irrelevant. If you've got more tyre deg than the guys in front of you, which they understood they did, then all of a sudden your soft tyre advantage won't even last. It's just irrelevant at that point. It's a neutral playing ground. I don't know why they just decided, no, let's just not bother. For me, if I'm in a position where I'm only a tenth and a half off of pole, you can find a tenth and a half, you know, in those situations. I mean, Verstappen found about a tenth or so. Perez found about another tenth or so. You can find it. It's not that, well, I say it's not that difficult. I'm not a driver, am I? I'm just a kid sitting in a chair, to be honest, talking about it. But I just really don't understand that. I feel like if you're going to go for something, go for pole. You know, in the first stint when Leclerc overtook Perez, he managed to hold off Perez for the entirety of the first stint. And even in that situation, even if Ferrari didn't have the car, and they didn't, to beat Red Bull, why on earth didn't they just go for track position? Try and get pole position. If you get pole position, congrats, because Leclerc held off Perez for the entirety of the first stint. Make Red Bull do something different. You know, it'd be a case of, oh, well, maybe they have to undercut you, so it means that they have to use up more of their tyres, trying to get through a bit of traffic. Maybe you do the undercut to keep track position, and then Red Bull do a big overcut. All of a sudden, they've got a you know, make them work for it. Ferrari didn't make Red Bull work for that Grand Prix. It's funny as it is, Verstappen led from lap 1 and had the advantage and was gone. That's it, done so. Checo had a little bit more work to do, but with Red Bull's strategy, he was able to do that. And at the end of the day, Ferrari couldn't match it. Yeah, I mean, no matter what Ferrari did, it wouldn't have made a difference. But they definitely didn't make Red Bull work for it, and their opportunity of doing something in qualifying different was really not a good idea. And that was obviously curtailed by the DNF from Ferrari, which apparently was confirmed to be the control electronics, which they actually changed the battery heading into the Grand Prix. From qualifying to the race, they changed that control electronics because their first one, they found something that they weren't happy with, and they wanted to investigate it. They took it out, put the fresh one in, and the fresh one then decided to fail. Yeah, not a good time. And Charles Leclerc is guaranteed to get a penalty because if the first control electronics that they found is not good enough, then all of a sudden they've got to go to control electronic number 3. And you're only allowed 2 in a season. And that's a 10-place grid penalty. So it's already a disaster for Ferrari, and we're one race in. And obviously Sainz didn't have a great race at all. He suffered a hell of a lot more with tyre deg compared to what Charles Leclerc did, and even got beat by Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, and nearly beaten by Lewis Hamilton. But in the end, Hamilton, I think, spent too much time fighting Alonso, to be honest, that he screwed up his own tyres, and obviously his tyre deg was worse than the Aston Martin. So yeah, Ferrari threw it away. Going to Aston Martin, Alonso stole the show. Fair play to Fernando Alonso. He saved that Grand Prix, really, from being a proper bore fest. I think Alonso definitely would have got a podium, no matter what. I really do believe that. I think Alonso was compromised because he got whacked at the start. Got a little bit flustered. Was stuck behind the 2 Mercedeses in the first stint. And Mercedes had better straight line speed than Aston Martin, so it was harder to try and keep up with them in the straights. Eventually, though, the tyre wear came into play, and he obviously did the jump on George Russell by overtaking him, and then the undercut came into play, and then obviously he did the move on Lewis Hamilton then later on. I think if Alonso didn't have that problem, I think Alonso probably would have got the switchback on Hamilton into turn 4 on the first lap, but in the end, for Fernando, it didn't really make a difference, and I think he probably would have got a podium. Like I said, he probably would have passed Sainz at the end of maybe the first stint. And then he would have had a great duel with Charles Leclerc in the end. And even probably stayed with the likes of Checo and Charles. And maybe even actually challenged Checo had he not been held up and all the way back. But it was a great result from Fernando Alonso. For Mercedes, it was not a great weekend for them. Especially for, you know, a Mercedes fanboy. Me. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's good points, and there's a lot to learn. Let me know as well in the comment section down below if you do enjoy this video. I have another video lined up where I want to talk about Mercedes-Benz in its own separate video. So let me know if you're interested in seeing that. I mean, it doesn't make a difference really because I'm about to record it straight after this. But yeah, I have my thoughts on Mercedes-Benz, which will puzzle you, but this is called the F1 debate. So it's all about debating it. So we'll wait and see. Yeah, it was an alright race from them. They suffered heavily from tyre degradation and they had to manage a lot, which really compromised them. But there were some positives to go in there. I'm not going to talk about them too much because, again, I'm going to have a separate video on them. Who is next then that we want to talk about? McLaren. Yeah, that was a really bad race for them. McLaren struggled a lot in Bahrain anyway. They had a lot of problems in testing with the wheelbarrow, constantly just braking, probably because it was too light. Obviously, everyone trying to make everything as light as possible. Sometimes you just go a bit too light and it's going to cause you a lot of problems. And then Lando Norris did the 25 million stop challenge because he had to fill up his pneumatic pressure constantly before DNFing straight after that, which really just didn't help him at all. Alpine, they were on the two ends of the spectrum. We had one end of the spectrum being phenomenal, which was Pierre Gasly. Fantastic fight back, great strategy, starting last. He was really lost after qualifying as well. You saw that, and he managed to just brilliantly work his way through the field and get back up into the points. For Ocon, though, it was the complete other end of the spectrum from him when he got the 5-second penalty, and then he got the then they didn't serve the 5-second penalty correctly. Then he got a 10-second time penalty for not serving the penalty correctly, to then get a penalty for not serving the penalty correctly by speeding in the pit lane, resulting in another penalty. Hopefully that makes sense for you all. I know it doesn't, but just follow along with it. Yeah, nightmare weekend for Ocon. Absolutely appalling from him. It was a strange one for Haas. Haas had a lot of encouragement with Hülkenberg getting into Q3. I think Magnussen got knocked out in Q2 or Q1 actually for K-Mag. But a lot of promise, but unfortunately Hülkenberg's front wing damage on lap 1. On a track surface like Bahrain where it just eats up the tyres, it was never going to work. And they fell out well outside the points. I reckon Hülkenberg probably could have done something. But unfortunately for Magnussen, it really wasn't his weekend. And it just, yeah, didn't really go well for them. AlphaTauri, they were, again, they were okay. Nothing really special. It was quite nice to see Yuki Tsunoda's double overtake on his teammate Nick De Vries and also on Guan Yu Zhou. Obviously, the three of them were fighting into turn 1. I think Zhou went wide and Yuki went straight on through. And then Yuki managed to get the DRS on De Vries and pass through. Yuki, I think, in the virtual safety car, pitted for a fresh set of softs. De Vries didn't get the chance and De Vries was left to dry. Left hanging out for dust, shall I say. And that was his race pretty much over with. Alfa Romeo's race was very quiet, but a standout driver was Valtteri Bottas. He did really well in the first stint to keep up with the Aston Martins and the Mercedes, initially putting them under pressure. I think he also got past Stroll. Eventually, though, the pace differential was clear to see. And obviously, you know, Bottas did a very early undercut, so it meant that the likes of Russell, Alonso and Stroll all had to get past Bottas again. But it was a quiet race, but it was a solid one from Valtteri Bottas, and he was very impressive for me. And then Williams, I think I've gone through everyone else. If I haven't, then my apologies. I'll just end up forgetting. Okay, it was a good debut for Logan Sargent. Really unlucky not to get out in Q1, but unfortunately, Norris set his lap time first, and then it was a solid drive from him, and again, another great drive from Albon. He nearly got caught by Yuki Tsunoda at the end, but Albon had a bit more straight line speed, and I noticed something on the Williams, which was very interesting, actually. And hopefully, because I'll be trying to include different images and any video footage, if I can, of the cars. If I can, and I can find it, I spotted that Logan Sargent was running with a medium to high downforce rear wing. Albon actually went with a lower drag rear wing. They actually went completely separate ways. It's not often in a Grand Prix itself do you see two different drivers going with two drivers from the same team going with different rear wing configurations. The last time I remember seeing that was actually at the Canadian Grand Prix and also at the Austrian Grand Prix for Mercedes-Benz. Two different reasons. Obviously, in the Canadian Grand Prix for Mercedes in 2022 last year, Hamilton felt like he would be better off with a low downforce rear wing for the dry Grand Prix. Russell went with the medium downforce or the higher downforce rear wing for the wet weather qualifying. And then obviously at the Austrian Grand Prix, Russell had to use the higher downforce rear wing because their low downforce rear wing, they broke both of them and they didn't have any, they only had one spare. But yeah, it was interesting to see that they went that way. Not sure why, but you know, it is what it is. With all the teams pretty much covered and my thoughts of the Bahrain Grand Prix fully addressed, what are my predictions for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix? First things first, I genuinely believe that Ferrari are going to be closer to Red Bull than they were at the Bahrain Grand Prix. Now, it's funny to think that, but obviously in the speed traps during the Bahrain Grand Prix, Ferrari were definitely the quickest. I believe they were around about 1 kilometre of an hour faster than what Red Bull were. Now, of course, Red Bull may use a lower drag setup, closing them into Ferrari, but Ferrari will also do the same thing. With Jeddah being a high-speed street circuit, this will definitely suit into Ferrari's favour, and I really do think that they will be closer to Red Bull. Of course, we've all heard this throughout testing, and we've heard it during the practice and the weekend itself. Bahrain is a completely different circuit. Bahrain, in terms of the track layout itself, is obviously, you know, medium, a bit of high speed, but it's also the surface itself. It's a very abrasive surface, and it's not been resurfaced since it actually was initially laid for the debut in 2004, and it obviously very much eats up the tyres. It's a completely different surface to anywhere else that we're going to throughout the entirety of the year. So Bahrain is a very much a bit of an anomaly, and this will mean that teams that suffer with tyre deg will be a little bit more competitive, such as Ferrari and even Mercedes. Now, for me, Ferrari I think will be better because it is a high-speed circuit, and like I said, they've got a better straight line speed than what Red Bull have, and I really think they'll be closer. Aston Martin are a team that I'm definitely putting into the unknown category heading into this weekend. Obviously, they were very, very good in Bahrain, and they've got very good pace pretty much overall. They've got great downforce. What they lacked, especially in the Bahrain Grand Prix, was straight line speed. Now, they potentially definitely could have a low downforce rear wing. In fact, they will have a low downforce rear wing. No one has definitely not got one at this point. But would that hurt them in terms of their overall downforce? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll put them in a bit of an outlier for now until we see them there. I think Mercedes will definitely be stronger than what they were in Bahrain, but I'm not putting them anywhere in contention for victory or even maybe podium for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I think overall they fixed a lot of problems that were on the car for last year, but again, heading into this race, I think they'll suffer a lot less with tyre wear and tyre deg. I think, again, they'll be competitive in a straight line. They were the third fastest team in a straight line in Bahrain. I think the biggest problem, though, is the fact that they are lacking downforce, particularly on the rear end, and it was very difficult for them, especially in the high-speed corners. Well, guess what? Saudi Arabia is a high-speed circuit with high-speed corners, and a lot of them. The thing that maybe gives me a little bit of clarity on Mercedes being a bit closer is that maybe they were not as fast in the high-speed corners. A, where they wouldn't have the downforce, but B, I think because they were sliding a bit and having to manage the tyres a lot more, whereas in Jeddah, it's not really a tyre deg heavy circuit by all means. It's normally just a one-sub strategy. So I feel like Mercedes will probably be okay, but we don't know yet, obviously. Any of the teams that I think would maybe spark a bit of a surprise, I think Williams will actually be quite competitive. They normally have good straight line speed, and again, it's a track with good straight line speed. But the midfield is really, really close, and it's really hard to predict what they're going to do. I definitely think McLaren will also have a much better weekend than what they did in Bahrain, and we saw that actually in Jeddah. They were impressive at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I can't remember if they beat the Alpines on that race last year or if they didn't, but I genuinely think that they'll be a lot stronger compared to what they were. Of course, we know they've got a big upgrade coming at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix to fix basically the deadlines that they missed for this particular car that they've got, but I think that they'll definitely be there, but I am expecting it to be a case of Red Bull versus Ferrari, with Red Bull 100% being the favourites. But at the end of the day, all we can do is look forward to yet another Formula 1 race weekend, and a track that I genuinely think is one of the best tracks on the calendar, and it doesn't get talked about enough. Maybe after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, I will make a video on defending Jeddah, because Jeddah gets hated a lot, and it really shouldn't. But that is it for the first episode of the F1 debate here for F1 2023. Let me know what you think about it, and open up the debate in the comment section down below. And if you ended up enjoying the video though, leave it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. And yeah, your feedback will be very much appreciated. It goes a long way, and I will see you guys next time. Take care all. Peace.